All right, so I thought I'd tell you a bit more about my background today and tell you a little bit about some of the people who influenced me in my handreading development. If you've watched some of the other videos, you probably already know that I actually first came across handreading in 1983, and my first tutor in that was a woman called Fran Skipper, who was very much a junior teacher. She was actually a yoga teacher, junior teacher in the Chirological Society, but she was the woman who first introduced me to handreading and encouraged me to come on a course with her that she was running, like a 10-week introductory course. And in the course of that, which was during between May and June 1983, a guy called Dylan Warren Davis came up to Norwich, where I was living, and he gave a weekend workshop on hand reading, and it was him who first read my hands. Dylan was actually a very important influence in my hand reading in those early years, and I'll probably do a separate video about him shortly. But for now, I don't really want to talk about those part of it, but more the people that I met in the ensuing years, who were very influential in developing hand reading ideas that I got through in the 1990s. So I'm just going to share you a little. This is who I was in 1990. This is me in 1991. I've recently graduated from Oxford University. I'm living in Oxford still, and I'm writing lots of books. And one of the primary focuses I put at that time was to do a lot of research in the Bodleian Library. And I was a practicing hand reader, but my main emphasis was on teaching and writing and researching. And it was therefore a fantastic joy to meet this fellow, who I'm sure many of you know, the guy on the right here. Some of you may know this chap called Johnny Fincham. This is actually a photograph of the very first time I met Johnny. This is taken in 1989. So by 1989, I had become the secretary of the Chirological Society, and I was the most active tutor in the Chirological Society. And every year we went to Croatia and had a 2-week residential seminar on the Adriatic coast. And every afternoon I would teach hand reading to usually about 30 people, mostly Croatians, but obviously some English people too, who were on this residential seminar. And Johnny attended this residential seminar, and this is where I first met him. And as you can see there, he's in the middle of asking me a question about something, who knows what. This was the first time that we actually encountered each other. And that was the beginning of a very long and fruitful relationship between the two of us, which kind of went on through the next couple of years. But he then invited me to come to Norwich, and I would repeat what Dylan Warren Davis was doing when he was the secretary of the Chirological Society. And I used to go to Norwich on a regular basis to go and teach Johnny and teach him all the intermediate stuff. Johnny actually started his hand reading career with a guy called Dave Gillen. So I was living in Norwich in the period 1981 to 1986, and I was teaching hand reading from 1984 onwards. And before I left in 1986, I trained a guy called Dave Gillen to take over my hand reading teaching work in Norwich, because I was going to Oxford University. So I went to Oxford in 1986. And it was in 1987 that Dave was teaching, and or maybe it was 1986 actually, 86 or 87, anyway, that sort of time, that Johnny met Dave, and Dave taught him the basics of hand reading. But I'd actually taught Dave Gillen before I left in a kind of one-on-one intensive for about 4 or 5 weeks. I went through the whole thing in private one-on-one lessons with him. So I kind of imparted all my knowledge to Dave, and then Dave started teaching classes because he was running the yoga classes as well, and that's where Johnny met him. So Johnny initially started hand reading with Dave Gillen, and then came to meet me when we went to the seminar in Orebic in Croatia in 1989. And from there on, I would regularly go back to Norwich to go and teach hand reading stuff and teaching all the intermediate chirology stuff. And so we had a fantastic relationship over the years. And one of the things that kind of emerged from that we did together was we had this thing we called advanced study group. And here's Johnny at one of the advanced. So this is actually the last advanced study group we did. I think it was in 1998, when we were doing mental health and the hand. That was held in Oxford. Most of them were held in London, but this one was held in Oxford, and was the one which Tamar Brill came to from Israel. She came all the way from Israel to attend this conference. But we did these conferences on a regular basis. I think we did 12 of them altogether. I have all the recordings of that in that box of you can see up there behind me the attaché case with cassette tapes. They're all recorded. And this was a very formative time for us all in the 1990s, where we were basically getting together and sharing ideas. So Johnny, by this time, had completed his diploma paper, he'd done his foundation paper, he'd done his intermediate paper. He is the only other person who's completed all those papers. There's a woman called Sheila DaCosta, and Chris Swain did a lot of them too. But Johnny was always the most prolific writer and also the most experienced hand reader. So it was a great joy to get together with him in the 1990s. And whenever we would get together, we would thrash out these different ideas, whether it was about mental health in the hand or significance of the line, like the minor earth line, or emotionality and sexuality from the hand. And Johnny would always come to these meetings with this great big pile of prints that he'd got and these amazing ideas from all his experiences of reading hands. And we would share the ideas together, and he would sort of say, oh, I think with this. And I go, well, that doesn't pan out with other books, or so nobody agrees with that viewpoint. Or, for example, there would be something like, I'd say, well, this is a theory that we've got about certain features of the hand, and how does that pan out in your experience, Johnny? And he would kind of give us an answer based upon his experience. So it was a really fertile time for the both of us to collaborate in that way and to share ideas. And I certainly learned a lot from Johnny in that process. And it was for all of us who attended, it was a really marvelous thing to be doing, because we basically got through a whole raft of information that we kind of worked out what worked and what didn't work from the hand. Now, the woman you can see there on my right is Laura Thornton, and I'll talk about her in a separate video, but she was also a really important part of that study group, and also probably one of the bigger influences on my handwriting than anybody else. But Johnny was always a potent force because of his vast experience of reading hands. And probably the most memorable workshop that we did was on sexual handwriting, hands and sex, and was looking at this particular book, which is by Nathaniel Altman. It was published in 1986, I believe, or 1988 maybe, and it's basically 1986. And basically, it's a palmist from America who's basically writing a book all about sex, and it's an absolutely fascinating book. And I do recommend this book, not because it contains anything useful in it, because I think there's a lot of mistakes in it, but it has an absolutely excellent collection of handprints of all sorts of sexual deviance. And as those of you know who know Johnny's great claim to fame is that he discovered the significance of one particular line formation, which has been variously called either the pervy line or the passion line or the angular descending upper minor waterline, if you want to become chirologically pedantic. And it's a particular line formation that occurs in all sorts of people who have an interest in different kind of sexual kind of experiences. And what's fascinating about this book by Nathaniel Altman is he's actually got lots and lots and lots of examples in his book of this particular line. And there's a good example. You can see it in that hand there. There's a line that comes down from between the air finger and fire finger. In fact, even in this handprint over here on this side as well, same thing. I'll just put my finger next to that so you can see where the actual line is. You can see it like an angling down towards the major waterline. And so that line is on almost every single handprint that this guy's got in this book. So here's an example of a transvestite or cross-dresser, as he calls it in this particular book. And he's got an example of it there. As you can see, all these fantastic examples that Nathaniel Altman has managed to provide. Okay, there's another one, a bisexual woman involved in sadomasochism. So again, a very strong angular descending upper minor waterline formation. And what's fascinating about this book is that actually Nathaniel Altman doesn't describe that line at all in the entire book. And Johnny hadn't read this book, he hadn't seen this book, but basically he did his own research into this particular line formation and presented a paper at one of these advanced study groups and saying, well, I've got this theory about this line because I've seen it in an awful lot of porn stars and people are like dressing up and they're exhibitionists and voyeurs. and I'm going to call it the passion line. And I immediately went to this book and said, well, let's have a look. And we went through this book. We could not believe how many more examples were in this book than Johnny had actually outlined. So, and the fact that Nathaniel Altman spends an entire book not even noticing this line, not commenting on it, not even noticing that it occurs in so many hands is kind of really, really poor indication, an indication of how poor his assessment qualities of the hands are. So that's one of the things that Johnny did. He's probably his most original and distinctive contribution. If you look on page 115 of the Spellbinding Power of Palmistry, you'll be able to find the information about it there. But it's a kind of testament to his approach to hand reading, that he has a lot of empiric experience. He's gone and read a lot of hands, a lot of people in over many years, and collated that information. And he and I, as I said, we work very collaboratively in that process. And I would help him marshal his ideas and create a kind of structure around them, get some clarity about the meaning and significance of them, and often come up with silly names like angular descending upper minor waterline, just to kind of make it more chirological. And so it was a great joy for me when he contacted me in about 2004 and said, I'm going to write a book. Can I use material that we used to use in the Chirological Society? And I said, absolutely. And I knew that he would take the structures and the ideas that I had, but present them to people in a really accessible and easy way. He's got such a nice writing style, and an easy and affable way of communicating. I was very happy that he could do that. And he could take all those ideas and present them. But that body of knowledge kind of like really came out of the melding of our minds together. So I'm really pleased that he and I are in regular communication once more, and having great conversations about hand reading again. But this was back in the days of the Chirological Society, when we used to meet on a regular basis to discuss all sorts of different parts of the hand. That was a very fertile period of time. 1989 to 1998 was an extraordinary time. That was the 10 years that I was the secretary of the society. I wrote most of my books between 1992 and 1994. I wrote 15 books in 2 years, and we used to run these seminar research groups. I used to do my own research projects and things like health analysis. And so there was, and having that kind of forum of discussion amongst people was always really fruitful. And it's fascinating to me that as a result of all that, we still have half a dozen hand readers around the world who were part of that particular group, who are still practicing hand readers today. So that's the sort of benchmark, and if you're interested in learning about that kind of approach to hand reading, at the moment there are 3 people who are teaching. There's Johnny at johnnyfincham.com. You've got Felicity Booth, Hand Readings by Felicity. There's Lynn Seal in Torquay in Devon, and myself here in New Zealand. So if you really want to learn those elemental approach to hand reading, you're going to need to do a course with one of us. But that's the core of the team of people who were at those workshops and those seminars in the 1990s. It was an incredibly fruitful time. And if you want to learn how to do hand reading properly, you need to go to a proper tutor. All right, don't forget to like and subscribe, and there'll be more of these stories soon.